In January 2026, President Donald Trump made two statements about America's defense contractors. The first sent defense stocks falling. The second sent them climbing. And both statements came within hours of each other. Later, Trump met at the White House with executives from several of those defense companies. His investment accounts also reported purchases of defense stock. Then came multi-billion-dollar contracts, expanded missile production, and one of the largest proposed defense budgets in American history. The companies included Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and L3Harris Technologies. All five are major defense contractors. All five depend heavily on decisions made by the federal government. And all five appeared in President Trump's financial disclosures. So what exactly happened? Did Trump purchase the stocks before the policy decisions? Did the companies receive government contracts afterward? And did those decisions cause Trump's investments to increase in value? The answers are not quite as simple as I expected, but they never are they? But the timeline raises a much bigger question. Should a president be allowed to own individual stocks in companies whose profits can be influenced by decisions made inside the Oval Office? I'm Darisse Smith, an independent journalist. This is the journalism of everything. When I began looking through Donald Trump's most recent financial disclosures, some of the investments immediately stood out. And this is part of a series I've been doing for the past few weeks, looking into all of Trump's financial disclosures and his policy decisions. There was NVIDIA, a company affected by the administration's artificial intelligence and semiconductor policies. There was Geo Group, a private prison and immigration detention company that could benefit and has benefited actually from increased immigration enforcement. And then there were the defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, RTX Corporation, formerly known as Raytheon Technologies, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and L3Harris Technologies. These are not ordinary consumer companies. Their largest customer is often the United States government. They manufacture fighter aircraft, submarines, missile defense systems, rocket motors, satellites, military communications equipment, and many of the weapons used by the United States and its allies. That means decisions involving the Pentagon's budget, weapons procurement, foreign military assistance, and international conflict can have a direct effect on their future revenue. To understand whether Trump's investments created a potential conflict of interest, I wanted to establish three things. First, when were the stocks purchased? Second, what major defense policy decisions or contracts followed? And third, how did the markets react? What I found was not a simple case of Trump buying five stocks immediately before announcing a defense budget increase. That really isn't his style anyway. Some of the investments were already held. Some purchases happened after major policy announcements. And some of the largest contracts barely moved the company's stock prices at all. But one moment showed exactly how much influence a president can have over an industry in which he has a financial interest. And it happened on January 7th, 2026. On January 7th, Donald Trump sent defense stocks in two different directions. First, he attacked defense contractors. Trump criticized companies for paying large executive salaries, issuing dividends, and buying back their own shares while weapons programs remained delayed or over budget. Trump's message was essentially this: the companies were receiving enormous amounts of taxpayer money, but they were not producing weapons quickly enough. He singled out Raytheon, which is part of RTX Corporation. Investors reacted. Defense stocks fell. And that reaction makes sense. Dividends and stock buybacks reward shareholders. If the government restricted those payments, owning the stocks could become less attractive. But then, later that same day, Trump delivered a very different message. He called for the United States to spend approximately $1.5 trillion in defense in fiscal year 2027. To be clear, this was a budget proposal. The president cannot unilaterally spend $1.5 trillion. Congress would still have to authorize and appropriate the money, and it is honestly still an ongoing process. But investors understood what the proposal represented: more ships, more aircraft, more missiles, more satellite systems, more contracts, and potentially much more revenue for the country's largest defense manufacturers. The stocks reversed direction. Lockheed Martin rose in after-hours trading. General Dynamics rose. RTX rose. Northrop Grumman also gained. In a matter of hours, statements from one person had first damaged the market value of these companies and then helped restore it. That person was also invested in the industry. That does not prove that Trump made either announcement to affect his personal finances. It does demonstrate the power of the presidency to move the values of companies in which a president owns stock. And that is where this investigation begins. Part 1. What does Trump actually own? Donald Trump's financial disclosures list investments in several major defense contractors. The disclosures report values in ranges rather than exact dollar amounts. They also do not always tell us precisely how many shares Trump owns at any given moment. And this is not uncommon in how investments are reported. That makes it impossible to calculate his exact profits or losses from public documents alone. And this isn't uncommon in financial disclosures. It is just how things are reported. But the disclosures indicate that his investment accounts held positions in Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and L3Harris. Lockheed Martin is one of the largest weapon manufacturers in the world. It produces the F-35 fighter aircraft, which is a $2 trillion program, the HIMARS rocket system, THAAD missile defense interceptors, and components of the Patriot missile defense system. RTX includes the Raytheon defense business. It manufactures Patriot radars and interceptors, Tomahawk cruise missiles, AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, and other missiles and radar systems. Northrop Grumman manufactures the B-21 Raider bomber, missile defense components, military satellites, and strategic nuclear systems. General Dynamics manufactures Abrams tanks, armored vehicles, and Gulfstream aircraft, which can be used in the military as like intelligence gathering aircraft, and also they transport VIPs. It also builds Virginia-class and Columbia-class submarines through its electric boat division. L3Harris produces military communications equipment, electronic warfare systems, missile warning satellites, and rocket motors through its Aerojet Rocketdyne business. Together, these companies sit at the center of American defense spending. But owning shares in a defense company is not automatically suspicious. I probably own some in some of my mutual funds and index funds, to be honest. Millions of Americans are exposed to these companies through mutual funds, retirement accounts, and index funds. The ethical concern becomes different when a public official owns shares in individual companies while also helping make decisions that affect those companies. And a president is not just any public official. The president proposes the defense budget. The president signs defense legislation. He selects Pentagon leadership. He influences military deployments, weapon sales, and foreign policy. He starts a war without even asking Congress. The president can invoke the Defense Production Act. And as January 7th demonstrated, the president can move defense stocks simply by making an announcement. Part 2, January 2026. The $1.5 trillion proposal was only the beginning. But President Trump didn't stop with his criticism. Later that same day, January 7th, he signed an executive order called, quote, prioritizing the warfighter in defense contracting, unquote. At first glance, the executive order almost seems contradictory. Here was a president proposing one of the largest defense buildups in American history, while simultaneously criticizing the very companies that would likely receive much of that money. But when you read the order itself, a different picture begins to emerge. This created two competing pressures on the industry. On one hand, the administration was proposing dramatically more military spending. That could mean larger contracts and greater revenue. On the other hand, Trump was threatening to interfere with some of the financial practices that make the stocks attractive to investors. The market had to decide which mattered more. Initially, investors appeared to focus on the restrictions. But over time, the scale of the proposed defense buildup became difficult to ignore. Then on January 13th, 2026, the Pentagon announced an unusual arrangement involving L3Harris. The government planned to invest approximately $1 billion in L3Harris's rocket motor business. The arrangement was connected to plans to separate the rocket motor operation into a new company. This was not simply a conventional Pentagon contract to purchase a specific number of missiles. The government was directly supporting industrial capacity in a business that produces the motors used in missile systems. L3Harris shares rose sharply following the announcement. Again, this does not establish that Trump personally ordered a stock purchase before the announcement. That is a very difficult claim to make. But it shows how government policy can rapidly change the value of a company included in the president's investment portfolio. At this point, I thought the most important part of this story was the January budget announcement. Then I found two Lockheed Martin purchases. One occurred before a major White House meeting with defense executives. The other occurred less than a week after it. And that changed the direction of my investigation. Part 3, the Lockheed purchases. On March the 6th, Trump met at the White House with executives from several major defense companies. The reported participants included representatives from Lockheed Martin, RTX, Northrop Grumman, and L3Harris, along with executives from other major contractors. The meeting focused on weapons production. The United States and its allies were using expensive and difficult to replace missile systems. The administration wanted the manufacturers to increase output. This type of meeting is not inherently improper. Presidents routinely meet with industry leaders, especially in the defense industry, because the United States has a very large defense budget. The government must communicate with the companies that build military equipment, especially when officials believe weapon stockpiles are insufficient. But the financial disclosure adds another layer. Trump was not simply meeting with representatives of an industry regulated and funded by his administration. His accounts held investments in companies represented in the room. Then, on March 12th, 6 days after the meeting, Trump's account reported another Lockheed Martin purchase. That transaction was valued between $15,000 and $50,000. We need to be precise about what this does and does not establish. The timing does not prove that Trump ordered the trade. It does not prove that he provided inside information to a financial manager. It does not prove that the March 6th meeting included information that was not already known to the public. And it does not prove that the purchase generated a profit. The White House has said repeatedly that Trump's investments are controlled by independent financial managers, and that is an important defense. A professional manager may have purchased Lockheed stock without receiving instructions from Trump. But independent management is not the same thing as a blind trust. In a blind trust, the official generally does not know what specific assets are being purchased and cannot influence the trustee's decisions. Trump has specifically chosen not to have a blind trust, unlike every other past president. Trump's disclosures reveals the companies that he owns. And regardless of who executed the trades, the president continued to hold a financial interest in companies directly affected by his decisions. So the ethical question remains, does delegating the purchase remove the conflict? What do you think? Does that distinction matter? Or does the conflict remain as long as the president benefits when the company performs well? Part 4, Lockheed Martin and the Patriot expansion. Lockheed Martin became one of the largest beneficiaries of the administration's effort to expand missile production. One major area involved the Patriot missile defense system. The Patriot system is commonly associated with RTX because Raytheon produces major parts of the system, including radar and other components. But Lockheed Martin manufactures the PAC-3 interceptor used by the Patriot system. In April 2026, the Army awarded Lockheed a contract connected to PAC-3 production valued at approximately $4.7 billion. That agreement was later expanded into a multi-year agreement with a maximum value reported at up to $58.6 billion. The phrase up to is important. A maximum contract ceiling does not necessarily mean the entire amount is guaranteed or immediately paid. Government contracts can span several years. Future spending may depend on congressional appropriations, production performance, military demand, and whether the government exercises additional options. So it would be inaccurate to say that Lockheed simply received a $58.6 billion check. But the agreement demonstrated the scale of the government's commitment to Patriot missile production. It also created the potential for years of future revenue. Lockheed was simultaneously involved in increasing production of THAAD missile defense interceptors. The administration's policy was clear. The United States wanted more missiles quickly, and Lockheed was positioned to receive a significant portion of that spending. How did the stock react? The answer is more complicated than simply the contract was announced and the stock soared. Honestly, it doesn't always work that way. And listen, while I do understand some financials, I'm not an expert in market reactions and why it reacts the way it does sometimes. By the time the largest agreement became public, investors already understood that missile demand was increasing. Much of the expected growth may have already been reflected in Lockheed's share price. The stock was also responding to earnings reports, production problems, geopolitical developments like a war, and the performance of the broader market. That is why I would be cautious about assigning a single price movement to a single contract. But the broader trend is not difficult to understand. A larger defense budget and expanded missile procurement created a favorable long-term environment for Lockheed Martin, and the president remained financially exposed to the company. I am Darisse Smith, an independent journalist. This is the journalism of everything.